Tab Media special report featuring a conversation with J.D. Greear. Dr. Greear, thank you for joining our Tab Media team today.
Oh, thank you so much. Delighted to be on with you.
All right. Well, I'm Jennifer Rash, and joining me is Margaret Colson. We are part of Tab Media, and we are featuring Dr. Greear today because he is the immediate past president of the Southern Baptist Convention.
That's a mouthful.
And I saw you smile really big when I said immediate past. So, so let's talk a little bit about what it's been like. It's been a few months now since you've handed that over. What's life been like since removing the title?
Yeah, there's this picture that when I got elected in 2018, and Steve Gaines is sort of off to the side, and I was holding the gavel, and his expression looks, just downright schoolboyish. And if you know Steve Gaines, that's not like a normal expression on his face. And I just always looked at that and I thought, well, what is he so like? He just lighthearted. And then, when I passed the gavel to Ed Litton this year, I was like, I know exactly what that feeling feels like. I've said this, and this is not like posturing. It really was one of the biggest and greatest honors that I've ever had to be able to serve Southern Baptist and to get to know them. And I feel like there's blessing after blessing after blessing. There's a tension that comes with it that, is not always, not always fun or popular. I feel like when people ask, like, what are any regrets that I have, I wish that I had prepared both my family and our church for some of the attention that was going to come their way. I was kind of ready for it, but I think people in our church weren't quite sure, like, why is all these people paying attention to and commenting on various things? So it's been nice the last few months to be the happy pastor of a local church again.
That's great. And I'm sure when you stepped into the role of president in 2018 that you didn't in a million years think that you would be serving for 3 terms rather than 2 terms.
Right.
How do you think the pandemic and the lack of having a meeting for 1 year, an annual meeting for the Southern Baptist Convention for 1 year, impacted our denomination?
I think it's similar to how it impacts the local church. We saw in 2020 a lot of things come to the surface that, truth be told, were always there. But when you take out that social elixir of being able to see each other face to face, and you're reminded that you like each other and that you really do have more in common. I've heard it said that our online version of ourselves is the worst version of ourselves that we have, simultaneously worst and best. Because, but when you think about just the ways that people got suspicious of each other, kind of adopted the worst possible narrative. I saw that as a local church pastor. I saw members that were close, but because they weren't seeing each other week by week and are just looking at Facebook posts and that type of thing, it revealed a lot of division. And so I think that happened in the convention at large. And I think a meeting, I'm not saying we should have had one in 2020. I think it was virtually impossible. But, I think without that, it magnified some of these things. I think what everybody was amazed by when we came together in 2021 is they kind of looked around and said, we really like being together and we really love what we do. And I know this sounds a little cliche, but the mission, the gospel that unites us and the mission that brings us together is larger than a lot of these other things that have occupied so much of our attention for the last year.
How did you work in that scenario with your local church as well as the convention? And that's a lot of people to have to try to keep on the same page. How did you navigate all of that?
Well, I also have 3 teenage girls, and that was probably, I felt like SBC, no problem. Church, no big deal, but teenage girls. Yeah, you feel a different level of responsibility with your church and with the convention, obviously. But I think with our church on the one side, you're trying to keep these people engaged and growing, and on the SBC side, you got a lot of, you got 46,000 leaders, that are just pastors in the SBC, and all of them are asking the same questions. And in some ways, pastors were more dialed in than ever. I think our congregation members may have been a little bit more disconnected, but pastors were, how do we shepherd people through this? I realize that it's kind of too early to declare definitively what God did or what happened, but my suspicion is 10 years from now, we're going to look back at this and say it was a net positive. for both the church and the evangelical movement. I think it revealed some difficult things. I think they're things that God is going to purify in us, but I actually think given some time, we're going to see that there were some ministry things that took steps forward. I think there's some things that were clarified, and it forced us to ask some uncomfortable questions that needed to be asked and answered.
Well, of course, one of the bigger issues when you were president had to do with racial reconciliation. How do you describe Southern Baptist progress in that area, and what more needs to be done, in your opinion?
Well, and again, I know that your viewers and readers will probably be familiar with this, but just statistically, demographically, Southern Baptists are one of the most diverse groups, denominations in the country. The challenge is that our leadership didn't always reflect really where Southern Baptists were. I mean, I said this multiple times in different venues, is that of all the churches that have been planted the last 3 years, 60% plus of them have been led by leaders of color. And so it doesn't make sense for our trustee boards and our governing authorities to not reflect that, because we not only want to be a reflection of who we are, we also want to be a reflection of where we think God is taking us. And so, that's why, and again, I the exact numbers are not off the top of my head here, but, more than half of the appointees that I put on these boards were either people of color or women, which were, I think, both underrepresented in these things. And I think that what that does is it sends a signal to our churches that, yes, we are unashamedly complementarian. We have values and our Baptist faith and message, which we are not going to compromise. Those things are not up for debate. But we also recognize that God has given us a body of people, and it is right and it is good for those perspectives to be reflected in our leadership structure. I think also increasingly, as the demographics of our country complexify and change, we're going to need to be ahead of the curve. And so I hope that my, 2 to 3 years of appointments did something to move the needle that direction to where we need to be.
Tell us a little bit about what it's like to do those appointments. I've always been curious, how do you find these people across the United States and all the different churches?
I went church by church and just, no, I'm kidding.
47,000.
40, I visited all of them. No, you work with a really good team of people, and you begin to talk to, whether it's state exec leaders, you talk to people in networks and church planning things, and you are not trying to, because obviously I'm not choosing the trustees, and you're not trying to be an overlord in the process. You're trying to say we need people that fit these criteria. And we want people that really do champion the Baptist faith and message. They champion the cooperative program. They're engaged and involved. They're not sidelined. You don't want people that are questionable in their involvement, engagement in the convention. You want people that most Southern Baptists would look at these and say, that represents me and represents where I want to go. And so that was my role, is to say, for gospel above all. That wasn't something I introduced to Southern Baptists. I thought it was something that Southern Baptists have held now for a long time. The Great Commission, cooperative program, and just said, let's look for people along these lines. And then you get, your committee on nomination, or committee on committees, and committee on nominations, and they do most of the heavy lifting on that. Mine is more of a visionary and steering role.
Well, I have to know, did you actually know what the committee on committees and committee on nominations were before you were president?
There's only one right answer here, isn't there? Yes, I did, of course.
Of course, right?
I did pay attention to that day in Baptist history class.
Okay.
And I did review a few things after I got elected, just because I didn't want to get caught saying something and people say that's not what that does.
Those committees are always interesting, just even the names will get interesting.
I didn't want to have what was it, Rick Perry? Remember his moment in the debate where he's like, there are 3 groups. I didn't want to have my Rick Perry moment where I couldn't remember what, one of them
one
was.
One of the 3, yeah. Well,
with that in mind, what, we all, grow and learn and change over the years, and over your 3 years of serving as SBC president, what did you learn? How did you grow?
That's a great question. I think probably the way that I most grew was in my encouragement, really, with knowing what God is like, all that matters in what He's doing in the world.
Mhm.
I came out of this with maybe a greater conviction than I had even going in, that if churches are going to be united by one thing, it's got to be the gospel of salvation by faith alone in Christ, the authority and inerrancy of the Bible. That life is too short and eternity is too long to mess around with other agendas. I find myself more often than not saying it's yes, there's so many important things we could be talking about, but there's one essential thing
Mhm.
that we could be that we've got to be about. So that was on one side, probably on a personal level. You just realize that. My wife told me going in when we were praying through this, and some of the Bryant Wright and uh, James Merritt and Ken Whitten and some others were talking to me about this. Veronica said, she said, if you're doing this because you're trying to climb the next rung in some stupid imaginary ladder you have in your head, she said, there's nothing but sorrow and misery that await. And she said, it's not going to make you happier. It's not going to increase your satisfaction in life. She said, it's just going to make our lives harder. And she was 100% correct in that. That if you're seeking and you're doing these things because it feels good, it's just that's empty, and it's a broken cistern that doesn't hold any water. But if you're doing it as a way of serving Southern Baptist churches to greater help the Great Commission, and that's a reason for us to be involved in the denomination. And like every young pastor, you kind of come out thinking, oh, just got to get involved in the denomination, but there's a good and bad way of doing that. And I think what I come out saying is, this is a convention of churches that has some incredibly the most important mission in the world, and it needs our involvement. I often quoted that line by William Carey before he went off to serve for the rest of his life in India. He told the English Baptists, he said, I'll dangle from the end of that rope there in India, but you got to promise to hold securely to the other end. I think those of us that are involved in the denomination, this side of the Atlantic and the Pacific, we've got to do it because we're trying to better hold the rope for our church planners and our missionaries.
That makes me think of when, the first time you ran, there was that whole scenario where you could have been elected 2 years prior than you were. We will never know, right? But tell us a little bit about how you were led up to how you got to where it all started in the whole concept that you would actually be a nominee for SBC president, and then what did that 2016 election do for you, and how did you make that call?
Yeah, when well, it started several months before that. Probably around November of the previous year, when it just had a few older leaders. The guys I already named that came and just said, "Hey, we really feel like this may be a role that God is calling you into, and would you pray about it?" And as with many things in my life, the more that I prayed about it, there were things that began to surface. Desires to see certain things, and historically, that's been evidence for me of areas that God may be calling me to lead in, just kind of the vision, small v, not like vision, but just like visions of what God wants to accomplish. And so those began to kind of bubble up. And First Thessalonians 1:12, God will give you every resolve for good and every work of faith by His power. And so I started to go that direction. Steve has been a longtime friend, and I would even say mentor in many ways of mine. And our churches hold all the most essential things in common. Yes, there are some differences in how we, what it looks like sometimes, but on all the important stuff we line up. And so, sometimes you go into these things and people have made it more of a controversy or more of a horse race than it actually is. I mean, I would have happily served, on Steve's staff at his church, and I would happily be a part of things that he's leading and had been. And so, when it came out, and I think I actually even said this at the convention, it's only in the SBC that you could have only two candidates run and still not have a majority. I don't even know how that's mathematically possible, but somehow we ended up there. And we go up there, and we're in the middle of this kind of third sort of thing, and Steve and I walked up and we sat down at this little table, and we sat down, and it was almost both of us Steve actually came out first, and he just said, I feel like maybe I need to step back. But he only said that first because like I deferred to him because he was older and I was going to let him speak first, trying to be polite. And I was like, no. I was like, I feel like you got the right thing here, but I just feel like you got the wrong person. And just feel, I know that this is Southern Baptists don't need this. They don't need to leave with one person winning 51-49 and one side feeling like, our side didn't win. This would be a great chance to demonstrate that this gospel and this mission that unites us is way weightier and way more important than anything that you think divides us. And so I was happy to serve on Steve's, one of his, I think, things that he was most passionate about is his committee on evangelism and rethinking that, he asked me to serve on. And so I felt like it was a moment where Southern Baptists, and we have these from time to time, where you sit back and you reflect and say, we really are. We look different sometimes, but this is it is an act of God's grace that we come together around a very conservative doctrinal statement, and we come together united on the need to get the gospel to the world. And I feel like that moment was not exceptional. I feel like it was reflective of who we actually are.
Mm-hmm. And just to for the viewers, that was Steve Gaines, who ended up serving as SBC president in 2016 and 2017, and is the pastor of Bellevue Baptist Church in Cordova.
I will tell you, he told me a number of times, 2018 to 2021, where he would say, I cannot tell you how often I have thanked God that my years were 2016 to 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And
I thought that might be the case.
Exactly. Well, now that you can look in the rearview mirror at your time as SBC president, what advice do you or would you give to future SBC presidents?
Yeah. What advice?
And it can't be run. It has to be something else.
Run the other way or run toward it.
Yeah. I would tell them, I think one of the best things that I did, if I could even say it that way, and hear me out on it, is when I went and sat down with the state execs who, they had the reputation, some of them, of being more kind of old school. Like, so if I represented something, many people assumed like, oh, some of us are going to be pulling in different directions. Mm-hmm. I sat down with them and I said, gentlemen, this is what I feel like God's put on my heart. And I said, but I want to hear from you. How can I serve you? And they opened up. And after we talked it was probably 6 hours one day, just, morning and afternoon, we came out of that room absolutely and totally united. And anything that had been fractured leading up into it, I thought for the most part was put aside. And we said, we want to unite around who's your one. Helping people, equip Southern Baptists share the gospel with their neighbors, equipping churches to church plant, taking some steps forward in racial reconciliation. Every single one of them said, we want to do whatever it takes to make our churches safe from abuse. They, said, how do we increase giving and participation in the Great Commission? There was not a one of us who was pulling a different direction. And I think the assumption leading in sometimes that you've got different factions is just, it can be overcome by saying, how can I serve you? And let me hear what God's doing in your heart. Let me figure out how to work together. So that is advice, if you want to call it that I've given to Ed, now that he's president, is just to say, you go in there and let's give each other the benefit of the doubt. I found, people, some of the best work that happened the 3 years I was president happened through our local associations, and just meeting with them and just saying, okay, again, here's what God's put in my heart. How do you see this working out? And how can I assist you in doing it? Rather than asking you to assist me, how can I assist you in doing it? And man, they bought it. They grabbed it. I met with the National African-American Fellowship, and some of them were like, nobody has ever asked us, what we're trying to do and how they can be a part of it. So I think that posture of humility and serving is something that goes a long way, because I think Southern Baptists, they want to work together, and they're ready to. We gotta posture ourselves rightly.
That makes me think, though, JD, for the last decade, there's been some tension if I could say that nicely, some tension between associations, state conventions, the national level, the mission boards, the different pieces and parts of all that's happening in SBC life. And it seems to have come out of the 2010 um, Great Commission Task Force report. It's what it looks like it's circling around. What do you think happened in that moment where there was this seemingly stereotypical type image put on state convention executive directors, associational missions, directors of missions, associational missionaries, that kind of thing? What do you think happened there? And is that one thing you're saying, the act of humility, the way to repair that?
So I think it's a way. I don't think it's necessarily going to cover everything. I think we've been wrestling, as we always will, with how well our institutions and structures serve, the bottom line,
Mhm.
and asking, all right, what needs to be tweaked, what needs to be reinvented.
Mhm.
Watching some of these states say we want to make sure that our spending is in line with what best serves the Great Commission, what best serves our churches. I mean, the moment you stop asking those questions is the moment you begin to atrophy and plateau and decline. And those are challenging questions. I say that as a leader of an institution, having to ask every year, like, is what we're doing serving these values and this mission? Yes, those are challenging things that every board, every
Mhm.
seminary president I know has had to rethink how they're doing seminary over the last 5 years.
Right.
Right. And so yes, state conventions got to ask that, local associations, how people are congregating, how leaders are congregating and associating now. That's all changing. And we can't will it to be differently. We have to respond to the realities that are in front of us. And so, yeah, I think humility, though, and serving will go a long way in at least setting us up for peaceable outcomes instead of hostility from the start.
And would you say that was there ever a point where there was some intimidation at all because of the like, hey, everything should be look like this. We all need to have this same model versus we trust that you're listening to the Lord and leading your area like you feel like He's leading it, directing you to lead it.
Intimidation from them to me, or me to them?
Whatever you want to, whichever way.
Deliberately ambiguous, just to see, right? I didn't really sense that. I didn't. I mean, yes, there are. We all want to come in and we want to protect our interests. I mean, that's just who would deny that?
Right.
But I think coming in, there's just a real spirit. Southern Baptists love the Great Commission, and most of them, when they peel back the layers, they'll say, "Whatever helps the Great Commission." And when you become somebody who is territorial, you begin to stick out in the room, and everybody kind of knows it. And I think that's a wonderful thing that God has done in our midst. So I didn't say I was never like, on the whole, I was never like, said you gotta conform this way. I certainly didn't have that attitude with them because I don't even have that power. So
Right.
I think they said, okay, let's. We've all had to change and adjust, and that will continue to happen for the next 10 to 20 years, next 100 years. But I think there's an agreeable spirit, at least going into it for the vast majority of us.
Many naysayers have been predicting the downfall of the SBC for a long time.
Yeah.
Now that you have more of an insider's look at the denomination, how do you view the future of the SBC?
Yeah, it's a good question, because you're kind of simultaneously, I mean, the more you get aware of your own faults and you see human sinfulness, you realize that if God pulled back his hand, it would crumble
Mhm.
all of us. I mean, in some sense, I'm less confident even in my own church because I see how much is owing to God's grace. So, I see that. You see that sometimes our unity seems to hold by a thread. You see that if God took his hand on certain things, it could fall apart. However, you also see that one of the ways that we say it here at our church is that past grace is God's down payment on his intention to bestow future grace. And when I see the evidence of grace that God has put in, when I see leaders that he has raised up, when I see some of the things that we're seeing through our boards and our seminaries, that bodes very well for the future. Not because our flesh is strong enough to maintain it, but because it's just obvious that God has his hand on certain parts of it. And I don't think we deserve that. And I don't think God needs us. I don't think we're his last great hope. I just think we're a group of people that, he's chosen to work in. And even with some of our, our history and some of our mistakes and how we've stumbled along, I think God is writing a story of grace and a story of redemption. And I can't believe that I get to be a part of it. And then I get to be like, yes, as much as we have messed things up, this couldn't happen unless your grace was doing it, and leading us. So I'll go to some of these things and I'll meet some of these, especially young, not exclusively young, but especially young leaders. And I think if this is what God is doing, then he's taking us somewhere pretty amazing.
Well, in our final minutes here, tell us why you would encourage Southern Baptists to continue supporting or to start supporting the cooperative program.
Oh, well, that's an easy one. So
I
I
thought
thought
I'd
you
give
were
you
doing
a softball
something
at the
hard.
end.
Yeah, a little softball. Well, I'll speak first to younger and then I'll speak to everybody. Okay. Because I think younger people, at least the ones that I have encountered that are like, is this all worth it? And you sometimes get involved in you just see things and you're like, maybe it'd just be better to be our own church or, I read something by a guy, his name's Tim Keller. He's not a Southern Baptist, but he said, you've got in the kingdom of God, you've got movements and you got institutions. He said, movements are really attractive because they're exciting and, just a lot of energy. He said, but movements and institutions need each other. And he said, institutions without movement are dead. Nobody wants to be a part of a dead institution, but movements without institutions lack staying power. And what you see is that through the years, the legacy that God has built through Southern Baptist people, he's given us some, I don't know another better word for it than institution, theological training institutions, mission boards, associations that cooperate. And those institutions continue now to produce candidates for mission. They produce qualified planters and trainers better, honestly, than any other group that I know of in the world. That's not a boasting thing. It's just saying that look at what God has done. And so, yes, there are some headaches and difficulties that come with being associated with any group of people. I mean, that's just whenever there's people, there's going to be headaches. But they are profoundly worth it to me for the sake of being a part of an institution that is really effective for the Great Commission. The church historian Rodney Stark says the single greatest predictor of any denomination or movement's future is the amount of young men and women they're raising up for ministry, more than the size of their churches, more than their money. Well, our institutions have become very effective at that. And that's something to me worth investing in. And so I will happily put up with the minor headaches that go along with being a part of a large, denomination for the major advances that we get in the Great Commission effectiveness and mobilization.
And so could I read that to say it's better you would encourage people to think broadly with cooperative program giving versus designated, so that all the work.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we've built a structure that is accountable, and we hold it accountable. We've seen that the last, year or two, haven't we? We hold it accountable, and it's just more effective to come together, to show up,
Right.
to be in the room, to be part of the election process, and to lead that way than for every man to do what's right in their own eyes. Right.
Well,
Jennifer, do we have time for one more question?
well, I'll let you get one more in.
I'll
We're hanging
one
up
more
right
in.
now, so yes.
What do you want your legacy as SBC president to be?
Yeah, well, I think it probably best revealed in the two themes of the conventions that I got to lead. One is gospel above all, and we're Great Commission Baptist. Those certainly didn't start with me, and I hope they wouldn't end, because I think what I found in my travels as Southern Baptist president, what I found was that rank and file Southern Baptists were united on those emphases. They want the gospel to be above all. They want it to be above our Southern culture. They want it to be above anything. And they want to be about the Great Commission. If we're succeeding in that, they feel like that we're part of a movement that matters. And so if God used me for a small way to be a teeny tiny flashlight on that part of the mission, that part of who we are, then that's something I'll be forever grateful for.
Well, I also think you should add that you know how to do a perfect balance of seriousness and professionalism and moving the meeting and levity and knowing when to hit the punchline just right to make the entire crowd lighten up just a bit.
Well, I'm glad you think that. Yeah, because I'll see my wife back there rolling her eyes sometimes.
Mhm.
That's what
So,
wives are for.
so anyway, we heard that comment a lot in various places. So you weren't too comical, but you weren't too stiff. So maybe that's one thing you can pass on to the future.
Oh, well, good. Well, thank you for saying that.
All right. Well, thank you for taking some time for us. And we will look forward to seeing what that legacy does right one day.
Okay. Thank you. God bless. Thanks for having me on.
Katie.